All right, today we are talking about a new kind of chord. New kind of chord, super exciting. We've been working with these pretty advanced chromatic ideas, right? We've had our sort of our modal mixture, even some extra secondary dominant stuff, and now we've had a good amount of modal mixture. We've deepened that to the Neapolitan. It's kind of hard to see how how much deeper things can go, and the interesting thing for me is, we started with modal mixture, which we said was color oriented, right? We weren't changing the function of the chord, but the deeper we've gone, the deeper we've traveled, we sort of are finding that these chords have very specific uses. Like the Neapolitan, for instance, has its very set out way that we're going to see it, right? We looked at those non-traditional uses of the Neapolitan, but even those weren't actually that far off. They were just sort of not the textbook thing. We're going to continue that trend here of going more and more specific farther into these chords. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at a sort of variety of chord called the augmented sixth chord. And we're really going to just start by sort of getting a foundation for that. So augmented sixth chords, this is sort of our next category here. You can see that it's plural, chords, unlike the Neapolitan where there was just that one Neapolitan chord. There's a little bit more variety here, but they are really centered around the fact that they fill the same function and they have the same interval at their heart. So the interval that we're going to really talk about today in this video here is the interval of an augmented sixth. When we hear the name augmented sixth chords, it's easy to imagine that we might be talking about like a sixth chord, like the Neapolitan sixth. It's in first inversion. Not so much here. This is really truly built on an interval, the interval of the augmented sixth. Now, you might be thinking, oh my goodness, back in Theory 1, I wish I had been paying more attention when we learned about the diminished and augmented intervals, because, man, I really don't remember that much. And you're right that this is pretty much the first time that we've seen this interval since those sort of giant interval worksheets. But the beauty here is that we don't actually need to only build it based on its intervallic outline. We're going to look at another more functional way. And that functional way is tied to the fact that these chords, as so many of the chromatic chords we look at, are predominant chords. So the augmented sixth chords lead right to the dominant, and that's really actually central to their identity. So we got a predominant chord that's built on the augmented sixth interval. Like I said, there are more than one of them, but they're all going to contain that same interval. They all share a pretty healthy amount, and in fact, all of them have 3 notes in common. So we're just sort of, tiny changes to get these different ones. From a theoretical standpoint, this is we're on the third click of this PowerPoint. We're kind of deep into it here. From a theoretical standpoint, augmented sixth chords are really unique and really interesting because there isn't actually a root of the chord. We had sort of a funky name with the Neapolitan when we were talking about that, but even though we called it something weird, we didn't give it a Roman numeral name, we know that it was still built on the flat 2 scale degree, built on Ra. It has a root, easy peasy. Augmented sixth chords, a little bit more murky, and we can really think about with these chords this kind of strange idea that the root of the chord, in a sense, is the interval of the augmented sixth. And the thing that really we want to take away from here is that because they're so entirely built on function, their entire purpose in life is to lead to 5. We can't think of it as a standalone unit with a root, right? Like think back to the major or when we were learning about triads, we could say it doesn't matter any key, F sharp, minor. Like that chord exists in all kinds of tonal circumstances. We say, okay, let's talk about B flat diminished. Here we go. Boom. We don't, that's not necessarily tied to a tonal center in the same way that these augmented sixth chords are. So we sort of think of them as really functionally and tonally centered, and attached to that in usage is that they're almost entirely a product of voice leading. And we're going to see that in a second, how they really have super specific uses. These are nitty-gritty chords, right? These are the kinds of things that you wouldn't put them anywhere. They're really, really specific, and that sort of can be hard because it means that they have some very what's the word, like finicky elements. But in a sense, it almost is kind of helpful because it means they're pretty predictable. Where we tend to see augmented sixth chords context-wise is when a piece of music has been sort of in the weeds, in a crazy area, tonally ambiguous. An augmented sixth chord is really, really useful because these chords have pretty much the strongest pull to the dominant out of any chord that we've looked at. There is no chord that pulls to the dominant more strongly than augmented sixth chords. So that's sort of why they're really useful. So let's get into the specifics of the interval here. So let's talk about the voice leading that's at the heart and really the interval that's at the heart of an augmented sixth. So like I said, we could think about augmented sixth by saying, okay, well, we've got a bass note. Let's sort of go a major sixth above. Okay, so that would be, and then we could get the major sixth and we could raise it by a half step. That's one way to do it. But a more practical and a more connected to the function way to think about this is related to where it goes, where it resolves towards. And so what we're going to do is we're going to think about the interval of an augmented sixth as a double leading tone to 5. That's a strange concept. We've talked about leading tones a lot, right? Like we really focus on leading tone motion as a central element of a lot of the musical push and pull that we're working on. Double leading tone's a little bit funky, but what this means is that in any key, if we can keep 5, if we can keep sol in mind, we can build the augmented sixth. So let's sort of look at this, and we're going to say it's going to resolve outwards to an octave. So let's give ourselves a key here. Here we are. We're in the wonderful key of G minor. Right, here we are in G minor. So we want to think about what could be a quote-unquote double leading tone of 5. So let's first think, what's 5 in G minor? And we know that in G minor, 5 is D, right? So you can see I've got octave, sol, D at the octave here. And I'm not worried about voice parts here. This is just sort of, we're taking two independent lines and connecting. We're not worried soprano, alto, tenor, bass here. We're just trying to get the interval that's at the heart here. So let's unpack this. You can see I've got an E flat on the bottom and a C sharp on top. That is our augmented sixth interval. So if we just looked at that, we could say, okay, E flat, a major sixth above E flat would be C natural. So if I take C natural and raise it by a half step, make a major interval bigger, that's an augmented sixth. You might be thinking, what is this augmented sixth deal? Why can't we just call it by another name? Like if we reimagine C sharp as D flat, that would be a minor seventh. And that's an interval we've used a lot. Minor sevenths are, at the heart, even here, of a dominant seventh chord. There's a minor seventh. We use those a lot. The directionality is the real key. We can see here that this augmented sixth, we're very purposefully pushing it outwards to an octave. So let's unpack these two notes here. If we look at the top voice here, we can see that what looks like kind of a traditional leading tone, right? C sharp to D. We would say, anytime if I asked what's the leading tone of D, we would all know that C sharp is the leading tone of D. Now, in this context, we're not in D, we're in G minor, but we're used to sort of leading tones that aren't the leading tone of the key, or any secondary dominant chord or secondary leading tone chord, like a 7 of whatever chord, would do that. So if we were here and we wanted to have a 5 of 5, right, because D is 5, or a 7 of 5, we know that C sharp to D would be a big part of that motion. So that's a typical element of leading tone motion. It's an upwards resolving leading tone, as we've always seen them. And we can know that in an augmented sixth chord, the traditional leading tone is going to be in an upper voice. And remember, when we say upper voice, that's sort of a really sneaky way of just saying not the bass. Not the bass. It's almost like saying, okay, everybody, let's sort of split into groups. Let's have everybody who's not Timmy in this group, and all the Timmys can go, and there's only one person named Timmy. So same thing here. The leading tone that looks like a normal, typical leading tone for us is going to be in an upper voice, meaning not in the bass. And the reason for that is that we have our other leading tone in the bass voice. So the bass gets this downwards leading tone. We've talked a lot about the syllable lay in minor, how it really pulls downwards to sol, lay, sol, right? It's very leading tone-esque, right? And this is where we can really exploit that. So in the bass voice, we're going to have lay down to sol. And that's this downwards leading tone. So we've got two kind of half-step motions here. Lay, sol, moving downwards in the bass. And then in an upper voice, we've got fi, sol, lay, sol, fi, sol, right? That's the interval of an augmented sixth. So the technique here is to have those move outwards, and that's really central to it. So I hope you can hear that double leading tone idea that always resolves outwards to an octave. All right, so let's practice this a little bit. Let's look at some music and try to build just the interval of an augmented sixth, just the interval in a couple keys. So let's start in the key of F major here. Here we go. We're in F major. Sounds kind of like this. Right? So here we are in F. I've sort of given us, or I guess I'm up an octave. I've given us the note F here, and we know that it's important for us to be thinking, for our augmented sixth, about what 5 is in the key. So that's our first step. Whenever you need to find the augmented sixth in a key, is to think about what 5 is. So in F, 5 is C. So I've sort of given myself a C in the lower voice and a C in an upper voice so that we can build this, all right? And what we know is that the augmented sixth is going to happen, right? It's going to happen leading to 5. So in this sort of empty space here, we're going to have an augmented sixth. That's the whole deal. So we can think, okay, I need both half steps that are away or in distance from C, right? So let's think, what's the normal leading tone of C? The normal leading tone of C motion, right? Leading tone in C is B to C, right? Now, in the key of F, we have a B flat, so we know that we just need to make sure we have a B natural, and that's going to go in the upper voice, right? Because it's Fi. So if I look here, I'm going to put, oopsie, let's see if I can do this. That would be nice, right? B natural to C, which is Fi, Sol, right? Fi, Sol. So then, what's the other half step? This is a leading tone from below, right? Leading upwards. Fi, Sol. What's the other half step away from C? B was from below. We want D flat from above. D flat, which is, let's see if I can get the right note here. There we go, D flat, which we would use the syllable lay to describe. So here's lay, sol, right? And fi, sol, and we can hear nice clashy sound that resolves outwards to an octave. Hopefully, or I would expect, the use of lay really makes you sort of think about modal mixture, that sixth scale degree. Always kind of involved in the funkiness here, right? We obviously used it a lot in modal mixture, and lay was a big part of that. Even in the Neapolitan, in a major key, we have to adjust that sixth scale degree, and here it is again as part of our augmented sixth chord, and it just really filling that double leading tone. We were so used to leading tone resolving up. Here's lay, sol, pulling downwards to 5. And again, we could check that. If we used D flat as the root of an interval, we could build, okay, what's a key signature of D flat is 5 flats. It starts with B flat. So a major sixth above D flat is D flat to B flat. And then that B flat, I could raise it another half step to an augmented sixth. And again, resolves outwards. All right, let's do it in B minor here. So here we are in B minor. Let's do the lower voice first this time. And because remember, the lower voice is, or the bass voice, I should say, is always going to be something specific. So here we are in B minor. Right? We're in B minor. So 5, we always want to think of what 5 is. And in B, 5 is F sharp, right? So here's F sharp. So in the lower voice, we need lay. What is lay in B minor? Or you could even just think, what note is a half step above F sharp? It's G natural. G natural, right? So here we go. We've got lay going downwards to sol. So here's our augmented sixth. And again, it's all about lay. Maybe I should just write lay, sol, right? Lay, sol motion. That's really a super strong motion in B minor, right? Even just think about how many times you've heard something like, right? Lay, sol, right? That motion is really, really central. Lay, sol. So it's no surprise that it's happening here. Okay, so we've got our lay, sol. Now let's think, what's the other half step? Here's F sharp. That's going to be in an upper voice. It'll be in soprano, alto, or tenor. What's a half step below F sharp? What's Fi in the key of B minor? Right? So we probably can tell it's going to be some kind of E. If we just put E here, let's put E. That's going to be a whole step. So what do we need to do to this E? Because we want not Fa, Sol, we want Fi, Sol. So it needs to be E sharp. We're going to have E sharp. Lovely clash. Moving outwards to an octave. Lay, sol, and then in an upper voice, we're going to have Fi, Sol, right? And that's the heart of it. So we've got these two leading tones, and remember, always build it around leading to 5, leading to sol. You can do it as an interval, but in practice, it really is oriented around that whole desire to push to 5, to push to sol. So that's how we do it. So let's practice that a little bit, and then let's learn about one of the types of the chords.